What happens when a teacher tries to humiliate a student publicly, only to discover too late that she is facing a true genius? And not just any genius, but a prodigy certified with an IQ of 170, Barron Trump. What seemed like just another ordinary class quickly turned into an unforgettable event, a lesson that no one in that room would ever forget. Trust me, when this story ends, your jaw will be on the floor. But before I tell you exactly what happened, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It all began at one of the most prestigious universities in the United States. Dr. Linda Markham, an advanced calculus professor, was known for two things: her mathematical genius and her increasingly evident political agenda. Her class was one of the most demanding on campus, but that morning, something felt different. The whiteboard, usually filled with complex equations, now displayed a simple message: redefining academic priorities. The atmosphere was tense. The students entered the room, exchanging wary glances. At the back of the room, a tall, quiet young man dressed in a sharply tailored black suit observed everything calmly. Many knew him, but few spoke with him. Barron Trump was reserved, but his reputation preceded him. What most did not know was that behind his discreet demeanor lay a brilliant mind that, in just a few minutes, would surprise everyone. Dr. Markham began her lecture in an unusual way. Instead of presenting equations and mathematical problems, she started talking about the need to restructure the curriculum to include more urgent social discussions. While mathematics is important, she said as she walked around the room, we need to make room for reflections on social justice and structural privileges. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They were there to learn calculus, not to listen to a socio-political speech. It was at that moment that Barron's hand went up. The teacher narrowed her eyes. She did not expect to be challenged. "Yes, Mr. Trump," she said, her tone laced with impatience. "Do you have something to contribute to our discussion?" A silence fell. Everyone knew that Barron was an exceptional student. His perfect grades, his dedication, and his talent for helping less experienced classmates were well known on campus. But no one could have predicted what would happen next. He slowly lowered his hand and spoke with respect. "Dr. Markham, I believe that calculus is fundamental to understanding both theoretical sciences and their applications. We chose this advanced class to deepen our mathematical knowledge. Wouldn't reducing the focus of the curriculum in this area be a disadvantage for everyone?" Some students nodded discreetly. Dr. Markham crossed her arms. "Mr. Trump, perhaps you need to better understand how privilege shapes the educational system," she said with an ironic smile. "After all, not everyone had private tutors or attended elite preparatory schools." What happened next caught everyone by surprise. Instead of becoming defensive, Barron smiled slightly. "You're right about one thing, Professor. I was lucky in my education, and that is exactly why I believe we have an even greater responsibility to maintain high academic standards so that everyone can reach their true potential." The teacher's face turned red. This was not the answer she expected. "Oh, so you think you know more than your own professor about maintaining academic standards?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Tell me, Mr. Trump, what exactly makes you an expert in mathematical education?" "I'm not an expert," Barron replied calmly. "I'm just a student passionate about mathematics who believes in its power to transcend political divisions." He pointed to the whiteboard. "Instead of debating privilege, couldn't we use this time to explore the beauty of calculus?" The room held its breath. Dr. Markham walked slowly to the board, picked up a marker, and began writing an equation. The students exchanged looks. It was a multivariable calculus problem of extreme complexity, something even the best students in the class had not yet learned to solve. "If you are so concerned with maintaining academic standards, then show us how it's done," she challenged, dropping the marker on the table. "Or would you rather continue discussing your privileged position?" The challenge hung in the air. "That's postgraduate level stuff," someone murmured. Barron remained impassive. "Of course," he said calmly, standing up. "I'll be happy to try." He walked confidently to the board, picked up the marker and studied the equation with genuine interest, showing not a trace of nervousness. "Before I begin," he said, looking at the class, "I noticed that this problem has multiple possible approaches. Would you prefer that I use the conventional method, or would you like to see a more efficient solution based on Liouville's methodology?" The teacher froze. "Have you read Liouville's original articles?" "Yes," Barron replied without hesitation. "The English translation doesn't capture the true elegance of the method, but perhaps we should let the mathematics speak for itself." The silence in the room grew even heavier. Barron began to write. Every line was clear and precise. He wasn't just solving the problem, he was teaching as he wrote, explaining each step with impressive clarity. "This first step," he said, "uses a technique developed by Euler in 1755, simplifying the problem into something more accessible." The students were mesmerized. Even those who struggled with calculus began to understand. Dr. Markham, who had initially worn a satisfied smile, began to show signs of nervousness. She followed every line of the solution, realizing that Barron would not only solve the problem, but would do so in a way that no one could question. "Now," he said, reaching the final part, "we have two options. We can follow the traditional method, which would require several additional steps, or we can apply Liouville's approach, which significantly reduces the complexity." He turned to the teacher. "Which would you prefer me to demonstrate?" Dr. Markham did not answer. She seemed unable to take her eyes off the board. A hand went up in the middle of the room. "Could we see both methods?" asked Sarah Chen, one of the quieter students. "This is really helping me better understand what we studied last week." Barron smiled and looked at the teacher. Her answer now would say much more than just her mathematical preference. It would reveal whether she could recognize when a teaching moment transcended ideologies. But before she could respond, the door opened. Dean Richardson, an ally of Dr. Markham, entered in a hurry. "Linda, we need you for an urgent meeting about the curriculum changes." Dr. Markham looked at the dean and then at Barron. She saw the attentive faces of the students. Her instincts told her to run, but something in Barron's gaze made her hesitate. Then he spoke. "Professor, you challenged me to solve this problem publicly. Now it's your turn to show your solution." The room fell into complete silence. The tension in the classroom was palpable. The marker trembled slightly between Dr. Markham's fingers as she looked at the equation she had written. What was meant to be a carefully planned trap to humiliate Baron Trump was now turning against her. Every gaze was fixed on her. Dean Richardson shifted uncomfortably as he realized that his presence was no longer rescuing the professor, but rather bearing witness to what was about to unfold. The entire class knew the truth. That equation had not been taught in the course. The professor had chosen it because she assumed that no student would be able to solve it, reinforcing her narrative about academic privilege. But Baron Trump was no ordinary student, and now, in front of the class, with cell phone cameras recording every second, Dr. Markham found herself cornered by the irrefutable logic of numbers. She cleared her throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Well, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice forcing a confidence that was no longer there, "if you have already demonstrated your approach, perhaps we can conclude this demonstration." Barron did not back down. "Professor," he said respectfully but firmly, "you issued this challenge. Academic integrity demands that you now solve it." The students held their breath. Dr. Markham looked to the dean, expecting some intervention, but Richardson was paralyzed. If he intervened now, it would seem as if they were trying to avoid a humiliating defeat. Barron turned to the class. "Mathematics does not care who we are or where we come from," he said. "It does not bend to politics, nor does it favor some over others. The truth is always the truth." Once again, he pointed to the equation on the board. "Professor, if you truly believe that merit should come above all, then accept your own challenge. Or perhaps you would prefer that we work together on the solution?" The entire room waited. Dr. Markham looked at the students. She looked at the cell phones recording. She looked at the problem on the board. And then, slowly, she placed the marker back on the table. "This is ridiculous," she said with a frustrated sigh. "This is nothing more than a performance to prove a point, when we should be discussing issues more important than a simple mathematical problem." A murmur ran through the room. "So you can't solve it?" asked a voice from the back. It was Michael Chen, a scholarship student who rarely spoke in class. "It's not a matter of not being able to," the professor said, her voice now visibly shaken. "The point is that mathematics is only one part of education. We need to understand the social structures that shape our learning." The students began to whisper among themselves. "But isn't that what we came here to learn?" said Sarah Chen, still holding her pen. "We came here to learn calculus." The silence grew heavier. Even Dean Richardson realized that the professor's narrative was crumbling. But Barron did not press her. He picked up the marker and calmly completed the solution he had begun before the interruption. Then, when he finished, he stepped back. "Professor," he said, "this equation is now solved. How about we get back to class?" Dr. Markham's face was red. She looked around and saw the attentive faces of the students. But this time it wasn't fear or submission that she saw. It was respect, but not for her. It was for Barron. She took a deep breath. She began, but then stopped. She looked at the dean, at the students, at Barron. And then something unexpected happened. She lowered her head. "I made a mistake." The murmur ceased instantly. Dr. Markham seemed to struggle with the words as they left her mouth, but finally she continued. "For too long I have been so focused on fighting perceived privilege that I ended up becoming what I claim to oppose, someone who judges people by assumptions, not by merit." The students were incredulous. She looked at Barron. "You not only solved that equation, you taught me something about true leadership." Dean Richardson watched everything in silence, but before he could turn the moment into a bureaucratic opportunity, a sound from outside the room caught everyone's attention. The corridor was packed with students holding cell phones and makeshift signs. "Teach mathematics, not politics. Merit above prejudice." The videos of the discussion had already spread across campus. The crowd grew rapidly. Dr. Markham looked toward the door, realizing that at that moment the situation was about to spiral out of her control. But once again, Barron took the lead. He walked to the door and addressed the crowd with his natural calm. "If you're here because you want to learn," he said, "then come in, there's room for everyone." The noise dissipated and several students began to fill the room. Barron picked up the marker and turned to the class. "Now," he said, "who wants to learn about real-world applications of calculus in solving real-world problems?" What happened in the following hours would become a legend at that university. What began as a confrontation transformed into something much larger. The classroom, once an ideological battlefield, became a true space for learning. Attendance in Dr. Markham's classes tripled. Students who once feared calculus now challenged themselves. And Barron Trump? He continued sitting at the back of the room, helping classmates with difficulties, and proving that the greatest privilege of all is not social position, but the opportunity to learn, and to help others do the same. If you liked this story, don't forget to like and subscribe.